tribes or clans up in the north of Ireland that were organised, very, very organised tribes. The O'Neills, the O'Donnells, McGuires. You were just a lot of you were just in the O'Donnells' castle. So they were in the northwest of Ireland and in the northeast of Ireland, and down around where Belfast now is would have been the O'Neills. And they were under the leadership of Red Hugh O'Neill, fighting the English in what became known as the 9 Years' War. And the O'Neills were very, very successful in taking on the English because they used the cover of forests to come out and skirmish, take out a few English soldiers, and then run back into the cover of trees. And the English didn't know how to fight these Irish clans up in the north. And the Irish clans were actually beating the English in quite a lot of the battles. The Spaniards got wind of this. They decided to help these Irish clans and then get a foothold in Ireland. But we know what happened. The history is that we lost the Battle of Kinsale. The clans came back up into the north, and as they were going back to the north through a very rude winter, there was talk of cannibalism amongst the O'Neills and the O'Donnells and the McGuires, etc. And they finally made it to the north in a much weakened state. The 9 Years' War basically ended when the English said to them, listen, we can either wipe you out totally, or else you can take your wealth and get the hell out of Ireland and never come back. So the O'Neills and the O'Donnells took their wealth and they left Ulster, went down into Catholic Spain and Catholic Italy, and they were hoping to regroup and come back, but they never made it. Both O'Neill and O'Donnell died abroad. They never made it back. So Elizabeth I and James I spared no time in addressing this situation. They saw that the Catholic Gaelic nobility was gone in Northern Ireland. These troublesome clans were now leaderless. So Elizabeth I perpetrated what became known as the Plantation of Ulster. She died in 1603, so her successor James I continued on sending Protestant people from Scotland and from London up to Northern Ireland, and they changed the demographics from 100% Catholic to 66% Protestant, 33% Catholic, 2/3 Protestant, 1/3 Catholic. And the deal there was that if you went into the north of Ireland, into the very fertile land of the north, as you'll see when we get there, the land is extremely fertile. It's not like Connacht or the Curse of Cromwell. This is really good land. If you went there and you kept the Irish down, the indigenous Irish down, you were given vast swathes of land, 1,000 to 2,000 acres, huge farms. But you had to be a fairly canny military man to get your hand on this land to keep the Irish down. So you had an effective apartheid, I suppose, in Northern Ireland. If you're a Catholic, you were not allowed to own land. You weren't allowed to have a job, any kind of government job. You weren't allowed to practice your religion. You weren't allowed to speak your language. They were trying to just take the Irish culture totally away from the Irish, to take away any notions of nationalism, I suppose. Then later on in the 1600s, towards the end of the 1600s, you had Protestants that were being persecuted in France, the southwest of France, the Huguenots. And there was a massacre in the late 1600s called the Massacre of St. Bartholomew in Paris. That's where the Protestants in the southwest of France came up to Paris for the marriage of Queen Margot to Henry II of France, and there was a massacre. The French Catholics came out and massacred the French Protestants. So the Huguenots, as they became known, the French Protestants, they found themselves in a very, very uncertain ground in France. They migrated out of France up into Northern Europe, up into Protestant Europe. A lot of them went into England, and when they got to England, they were sent up to be part of the later end of the Plantation of Ulster. And these Huguenots brought with them their production, flax production and linen production techniques, and they hearkened the Industrial Revolution into Northern Ireland, into an area just south of Belfast called Lisburn. That's where the linen industries flourished, and it was mainly due to the French Huguenots that this happened. So, in the rest of Ireland, outside the northeast of Ireland, we didn't have the Industrial Revolution, but in the north, in the northeast of Ireland, we did have the Industrial Revolution. It started really by the French, but it snowballed and burgeoned, and we had heavy industry, we had shipbuilding, tobacco production, we had most of the ropes for sailing ships in the world were being produced in and around Belfast. So Belfast became the second city of the empire, of the British Empire. It became a huge city, nearly rivaled Dublin in size, and very, very wealthy, and it had a huge working class. And later on, of course, as we know, as I told you on the very first night of the tour, this working class actually got together in 1798 under the guise of the United Irishmen, and this was very alarming for the captains of industry when they saw that their workers were getting slightly socialist ideas of the United Irishmen. So after the United Irishmen Rebellion of 1798, I suppose it's not cynical for me to say this, but it is true that the captains of industry, the owners of large factories, what they wanted to do was they wanted to divide the proletariat, divide the workers. So they gave them notions of religious sectarian divides. And it's really, in the early 1800s that all of this kind of sectarianism started in Northern Ireland. Prior to that, they were kind of united. But this meant that the Protestant people in these vast working class areas of Belfast and other cities around the northeast had all the decent jobs and had all the housing also. If you were Catholic, once we moved into democratic times, you weren't allowed to vote. Whereas if you were Protestant, you were allowed to vote not once, but as many times as you owned property. If you owned 2 houses, you got 2 votes. If you owned 3 houses, you got 3 votes. As Catholics were not allowed to own property, they got no votes. So they were totally disenfranchised. So this situation went on, this kind of effective apartheid went on. And it kind of culminated in the 1960s when you had a very small Catholic middle class, and they sent their kids to school. Do you remember I told you earlier on the tour that the Catholics had fierce respect for education, because if you got an education, it was an act of defiance against the British. So some of these middle class guys were sent to Queen's University in Belfast. At that time it was 10% Catholic, 90% Protestant in the Queen's University of Belfast. And they looked around the world in the mid-60s and they saw what was happening with Dr. Martin Luther King in the United States, fighting for civil rights for black people. They also looked across in May of 1968 to France and the student riots of France when they were protesting against the draconian de Gaulle government. And they decided that these Catholics in Belfast and Derry decided that they would start their own civil rights movement. So in October 1968, the civil rights marched, and this was a march for the right to work, the basic right to work, and it was a march in Derry, and it was broken up by the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Now they were the police force. The Royal Ulster Constabulary were 99% Protestant. There was 1% Catholics, but these Catholics came from mainland Britain, and they were over here because they were getting paid danger money. They didn't have any affiliation with Ireland. In January 1969, so 2 months later, there was another People's Democracy March for the right to work, and this was a march from Belfast to Derry. And this march was broken up by a loyalist mob. These are civilians, loyalist civilians, that ran in with sticks, and they beat the Catholics off the street with sticks. And you wonder, why did they do this? Because if you think about it, for 2 or 3 centuries, the Protestant people in the north had all the decent housing, had all the decent jobs. They had 100% of the pie, if you like. So if the Catholics had ideas of civil rights, it meant that the people who were going to lose out would be the loyalists and the unionists. They would no longer have 100% of the pie. So they decided that they would beat the Catholics off the streets to stop them having ideas about their station. And when the loyalist mob, when I say loyalist, that means loyal to the crown, loyal to the crown of England. When the loyalist mob beat the Catholics off the streets, they were looked on by the police, and the police did nothing. They didn't step in and stop this. They were also looked on by the B specials. There was a special police force up here in the north of Ireland. 3 of them, the A, B and C specials. The B specials are the most notorious. They used to go into these Catholic nationalist peaceful protests, and they used to beat the Catholics off the streets also. And so much so that the British government were alarmed by the violence of the B specials, to disband the B Specials because things were getting out of hand. So they disbanded the B Specials, but the B Specials went home. They had to hand in their uniforms, but they did not have to hand in their British government issued sidearms, guns. So you had an effective paramilitary force armed with the British government. Now this was very alarming. So much so that there was loyalists and ex-B Specials going into West Belfast during this civil rights movement, and they were burning Catholics out of, there was Catholic streets where the houses were burnt down in an attempt to ethnic cleanse Northern Ireland. Now, the British government were extremely alarmed about this, and they secretly contacted, this is back in 1968, they secretly contacted the government in the Republic of Ireland, led by the Cork man Jack Lynch. He went under his tunnel back there in Cork. And they said to Jack Lynch, listen, we'll stand by for a week, and if you want to take Northern Ireland back, go in and take it, because we don't want it anymore. So Jack Lynch tried to muster his troops, but we were such a poor country back in the 60s, we simply didn't have enough buses to bring our troops up into Northern Ireland. So Jack Lynch said, listen, we can't do it. And the Brits said, well, if you can't do it, we're going to have to stop this. We're going to have to stop this ethnic cleansing in Northern Ireland, so we'll send in our own army. And when the British army came into Northern Ireland at the end of 1968, a lot of people don't realise this, they were coming in to protect the Catholics. The Catholics came out of the streets and they welcomed them with cups of tea and sandwiches. The soldiers, if you're a soldier, remember the British Army, you're generally young, you're about 17, 18, 19 years of age. You've joined the army because maybe you're not too bright in school, and you've no idea about your own history, never mind Irish history. And for all you can see, you're up in Northern Ireland, and there are all these mad paddies around you fighting each other. So this culminated in another civil rights march. If we jump forward now 2 years, 1972, in January of 1972, there was another march, and this march was, again, Catholic nationalists marching against internment. What was internment? Internment was, if you were a Catholic, if you were a suspected member of a paramilitary organisation, a Catholic or nationalist paramilitary organisation, the British government would break your door down at 4 o'clock in the morning, drag you out, if you were between the ages of about 16 and 60, if you're a male, generally if you're a male, and then throw you into jail and throw away the key, no trial. It was called internment. Well, there was a march against internment on the 30th of January 1972, and the British government sent in the paratroopers. It's like sending in the Marines. They could have sent in other divisions that would be less trigger happy, but they sent in the paratroopers, and the march started in an area called the Cregan, just outside the Bogside in Derry, and it marched down into the Bogside, which was a very nationalist area outside the city walls of Derry City. And there, that march was stopped. It was a totally peaceful march, I stress. It was stopped by the British Army. He said, go home, your march is illegal. And the marchers said, no, we have a democratic right to protest in this country. It's a freedom of expression. And we're going to march down to the Guildhall, which is basically the town hall in Derry. So most of the marchers said, well, we don't want any aggression, so we'll go home. And they went off. But a few of the kind of more extreme element of the nationalist marchers said, no, we're going down to the Guildhall, and you're not going to stop us. But they were stopped because the British Army opened fire on them. And they killed 13 unarmed civilians. Now, a lot of these civilians were actually chased down alleyways and shot in the back. A lot of them were only 17 years of age. The British Army at the time did an internal investigation on this. It was called the Widgery Report. And the Widgery Report said that the British Army had been fired upon by members of the Irish paramilitaries. But it's come out since in the Saville Report, which was more recent. The Saville Report cost 98 million as part of the Good Friday Agreement. And the Saville Report said that no member of the British Army had been fired upon. And as David Cameron, when he read the results of the Saville Report, only about maybe 6-7 years ago, David Cameron said, I cannot justify murder. This is the Prime Minister of Britain finally